as well.
I represent the east side of Manhattan, where the intake for the New York City homeless shelter system for men is located. And we were provided an estimate recently that there are 2,000 people who come out of docks, and their discharge plan sends them to the Bellevue Men's Shelter entry system. Do you believe that's an appropriate discharge plan from the New York State prisons?
Well, we can't legally hold someone past their release date if they are homeless. The law requires us to notify the local DSS if someone is coming out of prison and requires homeless shelter services. So we do that throughout the 62 counties of the state. We try very hard to work with the parolee to know in advance his release date, to ascertain if he has any relative, any friend, anyone who might be willing to offer them a place to stay. Reality is there are significant numbers of individuals who leave the prison system without a home to go to. We have contract beds that we use. We have various programs for employment that helpfully get them the money that they can then secure private residences. The numbers in New York City, I think, were significantly affected by the loss of three-quarter housing. So that amplified the numbers. But the number of undomiciled individuals is significant, and the subpopulation of that is the number of sex offenders who are covered by the Sexual Assault Reform Act, which requires that any residence that they get can't be within 1,000 feet of a school. So we will not release someone to a homeless shelter who's covered by that law unless the city or the county tells us we have a bed for that person that's SARA compliant. What we've been doing instead is relying on our authority to put these people into what are called residential treatment facilities. They're usually located near the community. We have one, I believe it's Lincoln, and we give them transitional services. We pay them $10 a day to work on an outside crew, and they come back and they sleep at the facility until such time as we do find a SARA compliant residence. But it is a huge complicating problem.
I am familiar with the sex offender issue, and in fact, I think the City of New York is working very hard to make sure that released sex offenders are going into appropriate locations. That has also been an issue in my community. But I will say that there seems to be a pattern of release of mentally ill people from prison without Medicaid kicking in before they get to the city, ending up at the front door of the shelter system. And I propose to you that's a guarantee that those people will end up right back in the prison system or having some terrible trauma happen in the community. So I'm hoping that docs can take a more active review of whether a discharge plan ought to be, there's no other option, so we'll just drop them off at the Bellevue Men's Shelter.
We try very hard to avoid that. We work very closely now with OMH on discharge planning. I've identified seriously mentally ill who also might be violent well in advance when they come into the system as part of our reception centers to put them into special programs. We know that ultimately they're going to be released. We want to make sure we give them the best opportunities to succeed. We are establishing new special discharge ICPs for this population. One is going to be at Auburn, one is at Sing Sing, where we already have the core program. We release them with a medication. I think it's either 2 or 3 weeks worth of medication that they have with scripts to refill. And your point is well taken to the extent there may be some that may not have been registered on Medicaid. If they've fallen through the cracks, I will make sure that we prioritize getting them Medicaid cards as well before release them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Assemblymember Giglio.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
I only have 2 quick questions for you, Commissioner, and I wouldn't wish the last year you've spent on my worst enemy. But besides that, my first question is, you said there was 103 new correction officers. How many retired?
How many of those 103 retired?
No, you hired a new 103. How many have you lost in the same period of time?
I should know that off the top of my head because we lose a lot every 2 weeks. It's something like 54 retire, but we keep, the 103 are added over our biffle, so we keep doing training classes to try and replace the attrition.
When you lose that kind of institutional knowledge, how do you make it up?
You can't replace experience. There's no question about that, Assemblyman. I wish our staff would stay longer. It's a tough job. They're eligible to retire after 25 years. That's the retirement law. But they're very valuable, especially because a lot of them have learned how to deal with violent situation by using their wits as opposed to the normal uses of force. So we value very much our experienced correction officers. I can't prevent anybody from retiring who wants to retire, but we keep replacing them with classes from the training academy as quickly as we can.
Yeah, in our limited conversations, you've always been concerned with staffing ratios and those kind of things to keep it safe and secure, and you talked about that in your testimony. The only other question I have now is this Office of Special Investigations. In that, you said that you hired 2 attorneys to run it. My question is very simple. There was no one within the Department of Corrections that had moved up to the ranks that could have filled those 2 roles?
There was nobody within that unit that was an attorney.
But you think it's necessary to have an attorney then go talk to the men and women on the line to tell the attorneys what's wrong with the facility?
I lost the
My
question.
point is this. You said during your testimony that with these 2 new hires would then, as part of their duties, go talk to individual correction officers about what's going on in the facility. My question to you is, would we be better off bringing people up through the ranks and through your command staff that you already have to fill these positions instead of asking outside lawyers to come in and ask the very people you're supposed to work with what's wrong with the facility?
Assemblyman, I think the answer is that we have the combination, the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. There are still people that have risen through the ranks, and there's still directors, or at least they occupy supervisory roles. Those are very experienced individuals. They started out as correction officers, but we definitely needed to bring in an outside perspective. Individuals that had extensive experience dealing with law enforcement, prior experience with district attorney's office, prior experience working with the Attorney General, and they can bring in the linkages they have to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, to work with the Federal Civil Rights Bureau from the Department of Justice, to work with the marshals, and bring all of that to bear so that we can be a much stronger office.
Do you think that's what's going to help you when you charge inmates and or correction officers with any crimes behind the walls?
I think it will.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Acting Commissioner, I had a couple of questions, and it's related to an issue that you just discussed with Senator Kruger. And I know you remember the notorious case of Daniel St. Hubert, who was paranoid schizophrenic, violent in prison, released, and ended up stabbing to death a little 6-year-old PJ Evito in Brooklyn. 7-year-old playmate, Michaela Capers, was stabbed, did survive. He was a suspect in some other murders, and he had been released from the state prison system. As a result of that, Assemblyman O'Donnell and I did a chapter together to try to address some of the issues. And last year, the legislature included in the final budget, along with the governor, a $20 million expenditure that I believe that you were referencing when you talk about discharge planning and that sort of thing. And I did discuss the issue with the OMH commissioner yesterday, and just as a background, there was $20 million in last year's budget for enhanced services to reduce recidivism and potential violence in the community. This includes additional supportive housing, assertive community treatment team services for at-risk individuals discharged from prisons and psychiatric centers, increased mental health assessments in prison, treatment for high-risk inmates, enhanced discharge planning, staff training, and placement of individuals in OMH facilities. So I'm happy to hear you say that you believe things are going better. One of the issues I'd like to raise with you, however, is that when I questioned the OMH commissioner yesterday about how much of that money had been utilized so far, she did say $18 million out of the $20 million line item. I would assume that you would think that these sorts of initiatives have been beneficial, at least that's what I'm gathering from your testimony today, and you would recommend that that program continues, because if there's only $2 million left, I don't see anything in the budget unless I'm missing something and you're aware of something to replenish those funds. Could you comment on that, please?
I really can't comment on these specific appropriations and how they're being spent from OMH's side of the ledger, but I can reaffirm that we are very excited about the discharge planning units that are going to be launched at Auburn and at Sing Sing, the continued work with the core program, and the continued collaboration that we do with our community supervision and OMH staff, including making sure that when someone has to get to a program, we arrange many times for direct transport. I'm also excited about the early identification of inmates when they come into the system who are both seriously mentally ill and could have this violent proclivities. So I think ultimately we will make a big difference in this area.
So you would obviously be supportive of such programming to continue in the same format. I'm just, so you're saying to us as a legislature that this has been beneficial in the correctional system.
It's been beneficial, yes.
Very beneficial in reducing violence. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Our next speaker will be Assemblymember Oaks.
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you. I just wanted to follow up a little bit. Senator Funke had talked about parole issues, and he listed off a number of different situations of individuals who had recommitted while on parole. And I had, myself, one of those types of situations in my district, a recent parolee who broke into a home. The people were away, but he happened on a mother and her daughter who were there to feed the cat, and they ended up losing their lives in that incident and whatever. So all of us, I think, have some of those things. And the issue of parolees, obviously, it's an opportunity for individuals to find their way back into society, but it doesn't always work. And I think back to Assemblyman Lawrence's question around that, or Senator Funke's question about Assemblyman Lawrence's legislation, the one thing of making information, right now police officers stop individuals for whatever, to check. They can tell that a person's on parole, but they have no information about the conditions of the parole. And so if the individual, by their activity at that moment, is violating the parole, they would have no way of knowing that. And so then it goes through a process of letting the parole officer know that that's happened, and then through a process of trying to figure out what happens. Certainly for those who might offend quickly after they've been released but may have violated in some way before, his proposal would try to make that information available to police and also give police the opportunity, empower them to do something then, as opposed to having to take several days or time down down the road of dealing with this. And so I think the question, I know you said if the person has been an absconder or had a problem, obviously they can tell, they can be a help. This would be a way of strengthening that, and I just go back to that of saying, I welcome a comment on it, or just a willingness to work with us and looking at it if we can strengthen parole in this way. I think it makes the community safer, makes parole work better for those who are going to follow the conditions of it.
Well, we value all of the working relationships we have with local law enforcement, so we're always willing to share as much information as possible. With respect to the specific legislative proposal or concept, we follow a protocol where we submit any feedback, thoughts to our Governor's Council's office, but we don't independently provide comments or suggestions on the substance or well-thought-outness of a particular proposal.
Understood. I just think it could end up making your job and better and easier and have us working better together. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Senator Savino.
Thank you, Senator Young. I'll be very brief because many of the questions that I had have already been answered. But you'll recall, Commissioner, that in the past we've been somewhat critical of your agency's level of overtime. So backing out the extra overtime that was related to the prison break, can you give me a sense of the level of overtime in the past year?
I can tell you that if we back out the overtime related to Clinton, and there was also a significant expenditure related to an individual that was lost in the North Country for a number of days, and we were participating in the search, that our process shows we were only a little over where we were last year, which is not good.
No.
But the good news is that we have started a process whereby, I've communicated to all my superintendents the need to justify every expenditure of overtime. We've broken it down by program areas so that Facility A, this is what you spent on program in this quarter, and this is what you spent on admin, this is what you spent on security. And then we have phone calls to discuss and show to them whether they made progress or whether they went in the wrong direction, and then it's incumbent upon them to explain to us the reasons why. There are a lot of reasons why we have overtime.
Not to interrupt, but I can predict one of them. And I don't dispute for a moment that the overtime is justified. I understand how hard it is to run a prison system. But the problems you have now are the same problems you had 5 years ago and your predecessors have. It's a shortage of staff. And we know that, whether it's in the civilian titles or in the correction titles. I know you've taken steps, though, to increase hiring in the correctional officers' titles, but I'm concerned about the other professional titles, the nurses. You know, thank God that one poor nurse finally retired, because every year she would wind up as the highest overtime earner in the state, as if she was doing something wrong, as if she didn't have it, as if she had a choice about whether she was going to stay. So my concern continues to be about the level of hiring so that we can sufficiently staff the facilities, so you don't have overworked corrections officers or nurses or psychiatrists or social workers or anybody else that's there, because of the level of security that is so important in maintaining a prison like that. So I just want to keep it on your radar. We're going to continue to watch this. It's something that is of concern to us, the level of overtime, not because you're spending money, but because you're spending it because you don't have sufficient staff to meet the needs of the institution. Thank you.
Okay, Senator.
Thank you. I don't believe there are any other Assembly speakers. So, Senator Montgomery.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I will start by offering thanks to you for a couple of things, and then I'll make my complaints. I'll register my complaints. So, first of all, I want to say my last visit to Sullivan, my staff and I were up there, and we were, it was a very, very interesting and was a good experience, and I want to thank the superintendent and her staff because she really made it what I thought to be a very worthwhile experience, so I appreciate that. And I also want to thank you for the fact that you agreed to do the advisory council for the parole facility that's also in my district. And that has really contributed to a lot of reduction in the tension that was around that facility when it first opened. So thank you for that. And I will just ask a couple of questions, raise a couple of issues with you. And in the interest of my time not running out, I'll do it all together and you can answer accordingly. I am very pleased to see how much emphasis you are placing on the whole issue of offering college and looking at training programs and those programs that really prepare people for a successful re-entry back into the communities. I appreciate that. The question about that, two things. One is, have we ever thought about the possibility of creating a sort of an educational a training facility where one of your buildings, one of your facilities could become sort of a hub, if you will, for this kind of activity. I'm so impressed. I've been to Sullivan, obviously. There's really such a great group up there, Sing Sing, Eastern, and the others that I have not visited, but I've heard of them. And I'm always so impressed with the degree of excitement of the men in there. And people who have expressed very serious intentions of coming back to their communities and giving back and becoming productive citizens again. So you will play a very major role in that. And I certainly would like to know how you're moving with that and what can we do to enhance that. And the second part of that is, how do we align what you do inside, the kind of training and the experiences that people have inside, creating some sort of a certification so that when they do return to community, they have something that says, I have these skills, and that can be acknowledged and accepted as a legitimate representation of that person's experience. So those are the two things that I'm asking.
Okay, Senator.
Thank
First,
you.
let me thank you for all the efforts you expended to help with the opening of the new parole office in Brooklyn. There was originally a lot of controversy. I know you helped us out. I know it's very well accepted now. In fact,
Yes,
I think
it sure is.
we've actually proven that the crime rates in that precinct have gone down.
That's right.
Since we've been there, but it couldn't have worked without your assistance, and we're very grateful to that. I'll take your second question first. We've already started to work with the Department of Labor to create pre-apprenticeship programs. We're going to have our first meeting, and we're looking at different voc programs that we have, and we're looking at what's available in the community so that we can start a pre-apprenticeship program and then continue it in the community wherever it's selected. So we're going to depend upon the DOL to give us some good advice in that area. And thank you for acknowledging the college programming. That's another big initiative, courtesy of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, $7.5 million of asset forfeiture money. College is very, very useful, not just in terms of producing, lowering recidivism, but also as a positive role model in the institutions. I saw the three gentlemen that were graduates of Bard with the governor at the announcement. I went over, I congratulated them, and I just said, make sure you succeed because you're carrying the torch for a lot of other individuals coming after you. And we know how excited the whole country was when the three individuals in the debate team went up and beat Harvard,
Yes.
Which was an amazing story, and they were from Easton. So we're very excited about that. And I can tell you that you've asked me, have I given thought to a building possibly being an educational institution?
Fantastic.
The answer is, I've given it thought.
Great.
But it's too early to talk about, what the possibilities are. We have to do some outreach with various individuals.
Okay.
But the whole idea of an educational institution, so to speak,
Sure.
is something that's at least worthwhile pursuing and exploring to see if that can be
Great.
done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Nozzolio. To
Commissioner,
close.
thank you again. Senator Montgomery, it's not unusual that we disagree on subjects, and that she and I have had wonderful debates in the past, and I'm sure we're going to have a few more this session, that we're going to be scrutinizing whether or not taxpayers' dollars are in fact utilized for this purpose. I know that there are, it's a purpose of providing free tuition for inmates. However, Senator Montgomery and I do agree on issues regarding training for skilled opportunities to provide inmates in their exit from prison entry into the community to have skill sets that are marketable for jobs. And that's something that I don't need you to get in the middle of, but it's something that we are going to be scrutinizing. What I do need you to focus on, Senator Funke mentioned this, it's something that is outside the prison walls, but relative to parole. And we talked about the ratios. We talked about Western New York. I think your three-point program regarding analysis of high risk moving into inmates closer to the facility they exited from, GPS bracelets, and transferring to official reporting makes a lot of sense. But if our parole officers don't have the appropriate tools, don't have the vehicles, you said 38 more vehicles. Since you made that statement, I've been trying to find in the state budget where that is.
It's not in the budget. It was just approved today, Senator.
Just approved today.
The plan by OGS.
Is this Danny O'Donnell's, Assemblyman O'Donnell's comment? It's nice that we have these kinds of appropriations available from time to time. It would be nice if the legislature knew about it. But the fact is, if you were able to take those out of last fiscal year, monies from the current fiscal year as opposed to next fiscal year, that this was approved and these are going to be forthcoming by the end of March?
Well, I don't know the schedule. I just got the news that our plan, it's a 3-year plan to increase the vehicles totals. I think the total we have now is 248. So it's 30-something. Don't hold me to 38 if it's 38 or 35, that we will be able to get this year.
And why we're discussing this is because we live in areas in upstate New York in particular that are vast in terms of geography, and that for the parole officers, as it is, they have significantly higher ratios than ever before. That we have sheets on the types of offenders and the types of cases and the case load, and the ratios are anywhere from 25 to 1 to 160 to 1, 200 to 1, in terms of the types of caseloads that individual parole officers are asked to absorb. And I think that in spite of your very good attention to this criteria, without you having more staff in the field, I just think this is not going to work. You're getting infrastructure, cars, that's a good thing. Thank you for that. Thank you for addressing the issues. But the question of more officers, not just taking those with only Department of Correctional Services training, CO training, and moving them into, I mean, we have many great COs who became parole officers, but the fact is to have them now from the prison into parole officer capacity without adequate training is very, very concerning. Please address, Commissioner, the issues going beyond the foundation you set up. And again, I'm here to thank you for that. But what are your plans to move forward with the deployment of additional personnel?
Well, right now, I know we have at least 2 additional classes scheduled for this year for parole officers, Senator. We've also gotten other equipment. We've gotten radios. We've gotten replacement vests. We're replacing, I believe we may have already completed it, the weaponry, the Glock that they use. There's no question that they need the appropriate equipment. The ratios are driven by the risk management plan that tells us whether someone's a high risk or low risk, et cetera. We haven't changed that. But what I can tell you is that there is the ability by the parole officer to make changes, to identify someone as, listen, this guy needs to be supervised at a higher level than what he currently is. And so that's been recognized and adopted. But I can't speak to you exactly what the ratios are in various parts of the state, but I'll certainly go back, we'll look at it, and make recommendations for adjustments as warranted.
Your attention to this is most welcome. I guess you're taking an absconder as a low security risk or lower security risk because the ratios there, our numbers show a 200 to 1 ratio, 200 parolees to 1 parole officer. That sex offenders, 25 to 1. Now that's not, I think most of the parole officers, if they only had that to deal with, they would feel more comfortable in their job in terms of being able to manage the system. But what Senator Funke mentioned, those disastrous criminality that occurred in Rochester by parolees, it's symptomatic of the structure. And I'm not blaming you for the structure. You're a career correctional personnel. You came up through the ranks. I appreciate the fact that you know corrections, and you've done a good job with corrections. But I think in terms of parole, something that was thrust upon you a few years ago, we discussed it very briefly at this table, if you recall, when the proposal first came through, a proposal that ended up being accepted, but it's a proposal that still needs ironing out some important wrinkles. And if the public knew about these ratios, I believe they would be extremely concerned with public safety. And I think that if you would continue the work to address, let us know what more resources you need to make this happen. You have partners here, and I know you're well-intentioned. Let's try to understand that we got to solve this problem.
Certainly,
Thank you,
Senator.
Commissioner.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes our speakers. So, again, we appreciate you being here today and all of the answers that you gave. Our next speaker is Superintendent Joseph D'Amico, New York State Division of State Police.
Okay, it's hot as hell. So, you wanted to go there and hear him?